Hey everyone, I want to talk to you about how to do maintenance on a guitar with a Floyd Rose or locking system. So this is a Ibanez Premium, and these are really sturdy instruments, really great guitars, really good bang for buck. And sometimes it can be daunting, especially if you're new to changing even the strings on a guitar with a locking system. So okay, let's dive right in. What you want to do if you have a guitar with a locking system, first of all, these if you've never restrung an instrument like this, first of all, what you have at the back here are these little Allen wrench screws, and so what you want to do with them is use a Allen wrench like this. This is a 2.5, I believe. Could be wrong, could be a 3, but anyway, if you have Ibanez Premium, you would have gotten one of these with it, which is a very, very useful tool, and it's got everything that you need to service your guitar. Okay, so first of all, you'll need to realize that these little pins here, they basically keep the string in place. So on a normal acoustic or electric guitar, you usually have a slot that you take the string through, and it either hooks to the back via the ball end of the string like such. So most strings, or all strings, have a ball end like this one. This of course is a Diodario B string, being the purple ball end. But with this guitar, you're not going to need the ball end. So what I would recommend is to cut the string basically right there. You can either cut it off right after the winding there, or even on the winding, and use some of the winding for some extra grip. It's really up to you. It doesn't really make a difference. But what you want to do is, once you have used this one to loosen the string, and you don't have to turn and turn and turn, you just have to loosen it until the string comes out. Now of course what you want to do first of all, rule of thumb here, is you want to unlock these nuts. If your locking nuts are in place, you want to loosen them. Don't take them off, it's not really necessary, unless of course you're restringing. But you loosen the nut or take it off, and then simply unwind the string so that the string doesn't hit you in the face when you loosen this. Good practical safety tip there. Okay, so what you then do is you loosen this just slightly, and you simply, having cut off the ball end, you now insert this part, the back part of the string, into that little slot just before. You'll see as it goes in there, that's where you slot the string in. Now it's got a little rounded beveled pivot that the string goes over, of course, and rests upon, and that's your bridge height. Okay, so the string slots into this, and then you simply tighten it. Now it's quite important, for instance, if you are going to restring your guitar in the winter time and it's really cold, try to have the guitar in a room that has already been air conditioned with a bit of heating. Try not to work with a icy cold instrument. It's just better because these little things have a way of, even though they are high quality, on some guitars they do have the tendency to break, to crack, or the guitar is old. It's an older model and it's been on there for years and years, and the guitar then it could be brittle and break. So you basically want to slot the string in there, just push it down until you can't push it any further. Keep it in place, just kind of wedge it down, plunge it down with your finger like that, and never kink the string, never make a kink in it. That could weaken the string and it could snap quicker, or even the same day as you restring. So you just want to wedge it down, and then simply use your Allen wrench to tighten it there, and don't over tighten the thing. You don't want to turn it until the whole bridge almost wants to come loose. You just want to turn it until it stops, and then a little bit more. That usually, for most locking systems, if it's a decent Floyd Rose system, it usually works to keep the string in place. If you find after your restring that you're using your tremolo arm, mine is screwed out at the moment, but it fits in there. if you find that you use your tremolo arm and you do a dive bomb and you know, whammy the strings until they hang on the floor, and you bring it back and it's dreadfully out of tune, then either this clamping point at the back bridge or this clamping point at the locking nuts headstock are too loose. In that case, you just adjust it and make sure that they're nice and tight. Okay, so let's get into the actual restring then. I'm not going to restring the guitar in this video. I'm just going to basically walk you through how to go about it. If you are used to a solid solid tail guitar without a floating system, and you bought yourself a guitar with a whammy, you'll most likely encounter a bit of frustration the first time you try to restring one of these. So okay, turning the guitar over. As you well know, that most electric guitars have a spring system at the back. So with this particular model, it's very user-friendly. They actually did a very cool thing. So you can turn this knob to either increase your tension or decrease, loosen your springs. Now these springs are slightly different. They've got two smaller springs here, and then they've got bigger ones there. So it's a really well-oiled machine, so to speak. Notice that there's a little piece of Scotch-Brite in here, or maybe in your country you call it something else, but you know, the stuff you clean pots with, you know, or anything. A little piece of sponge would do the same. This is to simply keep your guitar from resonating too much, because when you play, especially if you play with a powerful amp and you've got lots of sound coming out your amp, oftentimes it feeds into the springs pick it up, and you get this weird little resonance in your playing, even though you're doing proper muting techniques while you play, but you realize that there's this weird little inky sound in the background. And it's usually these springs that are picking up some resonance and then vibrating, and it comes through your pickups. So putting some piece of cloth or sponge or something that's not going to drop lint or anything in there, lint-free cloth or something, you put that in there and it just keeps it from resonating and bothering your playing. Alright, so the same thing goes for here. This is just a simple Velcro cable tie. And seeing that it's red, it's the same color, so all that I did here was simply to tie it around the strings and just make sure that it touches all the strings, and that way when you pluck a string, it doesn't do this. You'll notice these are all dead. Okay, now that's quite important, because these, if you take it off, then it sounds like a harp. It's got that little harp high-pitched sound. Now, same thing as with the back strings, the back springs, sorry, in the back, that catches resonance. These also catch resonance when your amp is loud, and they also cause a weird little reverb sound that you don't know where it comes from. That just means that these need to be stifled so that they are thuddy and dead. Right? So that takes care of that. What is then important, like I said, is don't overstress these. Just turn them until it stops and then tighten a little bit. But you don't want to turn it until your veins are bursting out your hand. Not a good idea. I once serviced someone's guitar, and one of these things broke. It was also the colder season, and the guitar was pretty old as well, and so one of these broke, and it was quite a mission to get one of my contacts to order me a part to replace it for the person. So anyway, okay, then the actual restring. When you put the string in, of course you are going to first put the string in here. I would recommend clamping these down first. You can do it string by string, or you can insert all 6 of them, or 7 or 8, depending on what guitar you play, and you can simply clamp it so that they're fixed in place. Right, so when you come to here, you'll notice that these are wound at least 3 times for the 6th string here, the E string. That one a bit more, that one a bit more, that a lot more, and these also a lot more. So you want a minimum for these types of strings. I would say a minimum of 3, maybe 4 is a good rule of thumb. But of course, with the locking system, once you lock it, even if these are completely loose, it's not going to make a big difference because this will keep it down. Nevertheless, it does improve stability if you restring the guitar as if it had no locking nut. So treat the guitar as you would a guitar without a locking nut, set it up that way. And then what you want to do with the height, once the string is locked in here in the back bridge, you want to basically take your pinky on the 12th fret, and of course the string is not yet, if you're putting a new string on, it's not yet tightened. So what you do is, if you can look at the height more or less, about a hand's width. I elevate the hand a little bit. If you did it this way, that might be a little too low if you take it over your thumb. But what you want to do is, when the string is in here, you then connect it here. You don't yet tighten it, but you connect it. And the way to know the length to connect it with is to simply, once you've slotted it in here, to lift up your hand a little bit, and like that, just hold it kind of between your thumb and nail so the string doesn't slip out. Keep it there, and then simply from there, you know, holding it up so that it's tight like this, holding the string with your thumb as it were, you start winding the tuning head. Of course, a reminder again, because this can happen, remove these because some people would attempt to restring a guitar like this, not realizing that these must be loosened first, and if you turn here, you can snap the string. So take these off or loosen them. Okay, and then basically start to wind. If you have a peg winder, which I don't think I have right here. Okay, don't have it on me right now. Anyway, peg winder, most people will know what it is. You just slot it over there. It's got a little lever, and you literally wind it up like a, you know, like one of those old cars in the 1800s. So you basically turn it like this, and it just shortens the time that you have to turn and turn and turn. But hey, we've all done this. Any guitarist that has had to restring a guitar during a gig or whatever has had to quickly change a string by hand, and that doesn't always go so well. But anyway, so you wind it, and then you take it around a couple of times. Now what I typically do is I would keep my finger as I'm winding. So let's say my right hand is on here and my left hand is winding. I would simply just keep the string down with my finger so that I get a nice even wind like that. It helps. And then, as you notice, I did not tie the string. I did not tie the string through the slot. I simply inserted it. I then bent it with my finger. I literally bent it according to the slant of the knob there, and started winding it. So what you do then is you simply hold it down gently. You don't want to, obviously you don't want to hold it too hard. Hold it down gently and wind until you get a nice tight wound fit like so. Okay, once that is done and you've done all the strings, you want to then deal with the very tricky part. Now this could be a hour process or a 4-day process depending on how you treat it, how you handle it. And what I mean by that is, once your strings are on and you start bringing them up to tension, what will happen is your springs at the back will start to compensate. They will start to react, and they'll start to resist the bridge on the other side. So on the face of the guitar, the bridge will start to fluctuate. The bridge will start to feel the tension, of course. And yeah, what will happen is this floating bridge, as they call it, will start to react to the tension of the strings and the back springs. So spring and string tension is quite a huge thing, and the issue with that is that once you start to tighten all the strings and you bring it up to let's say standard tuning, which is 88 Dynamite, Goodbye Eddie. That's a good little acronym to remember, 88 Dynamite, Goodbye Eddie. So once you get up to that tension and standard tuning, these springs are going to complain, they're going to contest. And that's a settling process that needs to happen. Now, a good rule of thumb is to know what gauge of strings you have on your guitar currently. This is a set of, I think it's a 10 to 46. Could be a 10 to 48, but I think it's a 10 to 46. Now, if you're going to buy a pack of strings, let's decide you've been playing enough blues in your life and you decide gent is now your thing and you want to play gent, and you need a 54 at the top for an E string, which is hugely thick, and you need a 13 at the bottom, which is also very thick. So if you change your strings from something like a 10 to 46 to a 13 to 54, needless to say, your spring tension that was used to a standard kind of a string setup is now being challenged and pulled. It's pulling a lot harder on the springs at the back, which means that every time you tune the guitar in, about 4 to 7 seconds after you've tuned it onto pitch is going to be almost a semitone out again. And if you tune the next string, it's going to be even more out. And if you tune the next string, it's going to be even more out, and so on and so forth. Now, that can be a very frustrating process. I think it's probably caused some people to just stop playing the guitar with a floating system because they just don't want to handle that, which is understandable. But if you understand that you've got spring and string tension to deal with, if you can reach an equilibrium between those two, in other words, the springs need to settle. The springs need to actually come to a place of where they're exhausted, where they are saturated in tension. In other words, if my hand is the springs, if this is their saturation point, you don't want to add extra tension. If this is their saturation point, you don't want to add extra tension. So you want to find where their saturation point is, and that you can only do by bringing the guitar up to standard tuning, playing a little bit, doing a bit of bends, play a couple of chords, play some heavy stuff. If you can do some heavy rock rhythms and really punch out some stuff on your guitar, go for it. Play the instrument so that you can hear how it responds to the tuning. Once you have done that a couple of times, here comes the stretching process, which will save you a lot of trouble and can make a 4-day tuning expedition into a 3-hour tuning expedition. Because with this guitar you will have settling time, and that will always take some measure of time. Okay, so what you do once your strings are up, they're in standard tuning, and you've reached more or less a point where the guitar is not tuning out terribly, you then take the string. I usually, in playing position, would do this. Okay, so in playing position, I then wedge my fingers underneath the string, like so. I usually take my 2 first fingers and I wedge it in underneath the string, and you can see I'm just doing a kind of a wedging tension here. With the wedging tension, you can take your right hand, and let me just hold the thing here. You take your right hand and you then do this. You simply pull it. You don't want to yank the string. You don't want to be plucking it, like you're trying to pick up a weight or something. You just want to simply do that. Just wedge the string a little bit, like so. Of course, when you get to the higher strings, the thinner strings, you want to wedge slightly more gently. You don't want to do it as hard as with these. And typically what I find is that the E string, strangely enough, takes the longest to settle. But that's up to your guitar as well. Your guitar may have a slightly different setup. So you simply wedge it and bring it back to tuning. And then you play the instrument and wedge it and bring it back to tuning. And you play the guitar and you wedge it and you bring it back to tuning, so on and so forth. You repeat this process however long it requires for the strings to simply be in tune. Okay, now I do want to give a bit of props to Ibanez here. They have made some really solid instruments, and this is the slightly lower budget high end of their guitars. The Ibanez Premium is a guitar that is very much in its functionality and playability like an Ibanez Prestige, but it's not as expensive as a Prestige. Now there are a few variables. Most likely the fretwork on a Prestige will be slightly more detailed, although this is already excellent. The frets are nice and worked off and rounded, but you'll just get a little bit extra work and detail, and maybe the choice of wood and things like that, and the kind of pickups when it comes to an Ibanez Prestige. But the premium models are not far behind. This is an Indonesian model. You of course get the Japanese models, which are highly acclaimed, but the Indonesian model, for all intents and purposes, are just as good. Yeah, so just on the side there, if you were to buy something like an Iron Label, which is by reputation the slightly lower class but still really decent instrument, it would be great then to, if you are not happy with your EMG pickups, or you want you're more of a lead player, you want lead tone. Of course, Damasio is fantastic for that, or the Fishman Fluence pickups. It depends on what kind of sound you like. Some people just really love the EMG sound, including myself. I think they're great pickups. Okay, so basically, once you get to the tuning stability and you've got that bear wrestled, that's most of your trouble out of the way. This guitar, I haven't tuned this guitar for, let me see, I haven't properly or intensively tuned it for maybe a month. Maybe there's here and there that I did a bit of a tweak, but I tune it very little. Granted, I don't use my trem as often. I sometimes, even just use my palm to do things like that if I need to. But by and large, I haven't been using the trem. If you are doing dive bombs and you are whammying the life out of your guitar, you will need to tune it a bit more often, of course. But even so, I've whammied this guitar flat in the past, so the strings are just hanging on the floor, basically. I brought it back, I played an E minor bar chord, and it was perfectly in tune. If you do that a couple of times and you whammy a lot, it's going to go out of tune slightly, but even so, it'll still sound in tune to the general ear. Okay, so props to Ibanez for stable, shreddable, good instruments. They really make excellent instruments, and I highly recommend them. Okay, so what's important to go through is to make sure that all these ones are fastened into place nicely. Like I said, don't overextend them. Don't do that, and don't turn it until the veins on your hand bulge out. And make sure that your wind is good, and then make sure that you do the tuning stability. So sitting in playing position with the guitar as you usually sit and play, or stand and play with a strap on or whatever, wedge your fingers in underneath. Okay, wedge your fingers in underneath, and simply roughly the 5th fret or so will do. And then with your other hand, you simply, like I showed you, just yank it a bit, not too hard, but you just wedge it a little bit so that the guitar interacts, the springs and the strings get to that exhausted point where it's saturated in its tension level. And that's the big issue. That's why people get discouraged with these instruments if they haven't restrung them, or they have to send it in and pay a couple of $100 to get a guitar tech to service the guitar for them. Because they are not comfortable doing it themselves. So hopefully this will save you some trouble. Hopefully this will help you, and you won't have to make use of a guitar tech. But even so, most guitar techs who know what they're doing will do a great job. And yeah, so consult them if you need to. Okay, so what you then do with these is before you tune the guitar, before you even settle the strings, or before you even insert these, so what you've taken the strings off, your old strings off, what you then do with these are your tuning knobs. This is how you tune a guitar with a locking system, for those who don't know, but most people will know this. So it works like a violin. So what you do then typically is take, for instance, the top string, or any 3 of these, let's say these three, you turn this one completely out as far as it can come out until it can't come out anymore. That one, the fourth string, the D string, you then turn in until it cannot go in anymore. So this one is at its highest and this one is at its lowest. The one here then in the middle is going to be your standard level setter. You then turn this one to the middle of that, so that this one is literally in the middle of the high one and the low one. Once you do that, this will be the level to which you set all of the knobs after the guitar is strung, or even before the guitar is strung. So just to recap, turn this one to its highest potential upward, that one to its lowest potential downward, and that one to the middle of the two. And then after that you will turn this one back to this one's level, that one back to this one's level, and all of them to this one's level. Basically you turn all these to level, and once you unstring your guitar to restring it for a fresh set of strings, you'll notice that these are no longer on par with each other because you've tuned different strings at different times in different measures. And that's a good rule of thumb, but do make sure to reset these to the middle level of the middle one here, or the middle one here if you're going to use these three. But same principle, one high as it can go, one low as it can go, and the middle is the 50% of both. And you then set it to the one in the middle. All of these then become, or are turned to, the level of this in the middle. Now do this before you tie down and tune the guitar. And once these are in place, you don't deal with them until you have settled the springs into tension, the string-spring equilibrium. You've reached that. Once you've done that, and it's settled and the guitar doesn't tune out anymore, usually the next day that's the case. You string it, you play it a bit, you jam around on it, you do some bends, you do some whammies, tune it again, stretch the strings, tune it again, so on and so forth. Usually the next day the guitar is settled if you haven't messed with the string gauge too much. And then you simply lock these, and once you've locked these and the guitar is okay in its tuning, then of course you start using these back ones to tune. If you use these to tune, you can of course snap the string. Yeah, so that's more or less it. And these are quite important things to keep in mind when you use a guitar with a Floyd Rose or a floating bridge locking system. String action. If you look at this guitar's string action, here you can get a good view of it, very close to the fretboard. I absolutely love this about Ibanez guitars. You can set the string action nice and low, and you basically don't get any fret buzz if your neck is in a straight position. So really good, really good craftsmanship by Ibanez there. Okay, so the string action is set by these two. So these ones, that sets the height of your bridge. So even though this is a spring-based bridge connected to springs for tension so that it floats and you can whammy it, it is handled by this number 3 or 2.5 Allen wrench, and you simply place it in there. And if you want to turn your strings higher, if you want to raise your string action, you basically give it just a little turn. Obviously you don't want to turn and turn and turn. That's a bit of a stupid move, but you just turn it a little bit, and you'll see just before you turn it, gauge the height, gauge where it's at, and just with your eye keep an eye on the difference. You basically then use these two, and they collectively set the height of the string action. Now it's very important to not have this one too out of whack with that one's height. They don't have to be exactly on the same height. You can set them as is comfortable, but you don't want something where the bridge is standing up like this on the one end and sloping down on the other end, because that's detrimental to the integrity of this whole unit. Okay, so that is more or less the long and short of how to restring a guitar with a locking bridge, a locking floating bridge. And you'll also notice this thing just as a last thing. Now, intonation is a bear. If you've never set your intonation on your guitar, that's should maybe be a whole different video. But what intonation means is that if the guitar's intonation, if it's intoned, if it's correct, your 12th string fret and your 12th string harmonic tone will read very close to the same on your tuner. So if you've ever done this and played the guitar like this, right, of course I've just played the harmonic tone, you simply hold your finger over bar number 12. Let's make sure of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 12. Okay, so you basically hold your finger right over the metal bar. The fret, of course, is the space between the bars, for those who don't know, but most people should know this. And you then basically, right, individually you test the strings. So you plug your tuner in and you then get the harmonic tone, and you then after that read on the tuner the fretted tone. So I'll give you the little recipe. If your intonation is correct, they should read the same for every string, more or less the same. They can be slightly out, but if they're, quite out, then your intonation is going to not be right, which means you play a D major or a E minor chord, and the guitar is perfectly in tune. Every open string reads in tune, but you play a chord and it just sounds wrong. It sounds out. It sounds like it's just not tuned. And that's usually because the intonation is wrong. So here's the recipe for the intonation. If fretted tone is higher on your tuner, turn clockwise. Okay, now turn clockwise is meant for guitars that have screws at the back. This one does not have that. This one has Allen wrench screws. You have to literally move it by hand. You have to loosen this and then move it by hand. Now, if the guitar is tuned up to tension and you loosen this, it's going to shoot right forward. It's just going to shoot right forward. So you don't want to do that. So what you want to do is, before the guitar is tuned, you loosen the strings and you then loosen this slightly, and slightly with your hand move it. But in order to know how to move it back or forward, you have to know what the reading of your intonation is. So if fretted tone is higher on your tuner, if fretted tone reads higher than harmonic tone, you want to lengthen the string. In other words, if you have a screw system that you turn here at the back, you then basically turn it clockwise so that this thing pulls back and it lengthens the distance from bridge to headstock. So where it connects here over the nut, that is the point. This measure, this point, and this point determines your intonation. It determines how in or out of tune your guitar is in a generic sense, regardless of the tuning knobs. Okay, so if fretted tone is higher than harmonic tone, you lengthen the string. So you basically you take it slightly back. Now these are micro amounts. You cannot move this a centimeter back and expect a good result. Your guitar is going to sound terrible. So you want to literally move, we're talking millimeters and sub-millimeters. So this can be a bear because you have to literally set this by hand. Now a good Ibanez instrument usually comes to you being set up. Not always, but usually it does. In this case, for the intonation, you might want to get a guitar tech if you've never done it, because it's going to confuse you. You have to develop a feel for it. You have to battle it out with the guitar until something makes sense and you understand how to settle it. So that concludes the whole tutorial for this one. So this is how to restring and set up a guitar with a locking system. Remember, the most important thing is that your string and spring equilibrium is reached, that there's the strings are to a certain tightness that they need to be to have the right pitch, and the springs at the back for the locking system also need to be exhausted at a certain level so that they remain constant and they don't give more stretch and tune your strings out, so on and so forth. If you're, just a last point, if your springs are too tight, if you, for instance, have this, or the older models of guitar, or not even older, maybe even newer models, but other models rather, have a screw system. They've got two screws that are usually connected in here. If you remove this plate, there's a little base hand like this, or a little base plate that has two screws through it, and it screws into the wood like that. It literally goes into the wood, and all you do is you make sure that they are straight. You don't want to, if my hand represents, or rather if this represents the little screw base plate, you don't want it to sit skew like this. You want it to move like this. Okay, so this is a base plate that you will see in there, and you then simply turn it either closer to or away from the wood that it's mounted to. That will set your spring tension level. So as you can see, if you've never done this, it's going to be a daunting process. It's not going to be an easy thing. I've had to spend quite a few hours and days being frustrated with the locking system and trying to get it sorted out. But once you understand why and how, it's a lot easier. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. You can also check out guitar tutorials on the Bag of Licks Guitar Studio site, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. May the Lord bless you.